a 6-year-old boy named Darius McDougall vanished during a family camping trip in the wilderness of Alberta, Canada, sparking an extensive 11-day search that yielded no clues. Despite the involvement of hundreds of volunteers and advanced technology, not a single piece of clothing or any physical evidence was found, leaving his family and investigators with a profound and unsettling mystery. Don't forget to write in the comments where and when you are watching us on this mysterious journey, and to subscribe for more unsolved cases. The gathering in the Crowsnest Pass area of southern Alberta was intended as a celebration, a convergence of extended family to mark several birthdays amidst the rugged beauty of the Canadian Rockies. The McDougall family, along with relatives and friends, had established their camp in the Livingston Public Land Use Zone, an area characterized by its mountainous terrain, dense forests, and numerous bodies of water. Among the attendees were Darius, his father, the father's girlfriend, Buffy, and her own young daughter, Kaya. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins completed the group, creating a lively atmosphere as they prepared to conclude their weekend getaway on the morning of Sunday, September 20th. The family was in the process of packing their vehicles to return home, a period of organized but dispersed activity. During this time, Darius, who was 6 years old and had autism, was playing with Kaya and a cousin on a small island just across a creek from the main campsite. The location was within clear view of the adults, a seemingly contained and safe environment for the children's activities. The narrative provided by the family indicates that the other children momentarily turned their backs, and in that brief interval, Darius was no longer there. The simplicity of this account became the starting point of a complex and ultimately fruitless search. The children immediately alerted the adults to his absence, prompting an instantaneous search by the family members present. Darius's father and grandfather began scouring this small island, moving in opposite directions with the expectation of finding him somewhere in the middle. Concurrently, his grandmother placed a call to emergency services. This initial, frantic search by the family continued for approximately 1 hour before the official report was logged with the Crowsnest Pass. Royal Canadian Mounted Police at 11:33 in the morning. The terrain itself presented a formidable challenge from the very beginning. Crowsnest Pass is a region of varied and often difficult landscapes, encompassing level ground that quickly gives way to steep, mountainous inclines, dense forests with significant deadfall, and a network of rivers, creeks, and bogs. This environment, while picturesque, is disorienting, particularly for a young child. Experts involved in the subsequent search noted that the thick woods make it easy for anyone, especially a child, to become quickly lost and confused, as every direction can appear indistinguishable from the last. For a child with autism, who might be sensitive to loud noises or bright lights and may not respond to his name being called, the situation was considered even more precarious. He might instinctively hide as a survival mechanism, seeking refuge under logs or in dense underbrush, making visual detection extraordinarily difficult even under the best of circumstances. The family's immediate reaction was one of panic and desperation as they spread out into the surrounding wilderness, their initial organized effort quickly dissolving as the emotional weight of the situation took hold. The official response to the disappearance of Darius McDougall commenced with notable speed, as Royal Canadian Mounted Police resources were mobilized and a command post was established. Within 20 minutes of the family's call to 9, the initial search operations that unfolded on that Sunday and stretched through the night were comprehensive, drawing upon a wide array of specialized units and volunteer organizations. The area of focus was initially centered on the Island Lake Provincial Recreation Area and the surrounding 4 kilometers south of Crowsnest Pass, the location where Darius was last seen. This zone is a popular destination for camping and outdoor recreation, attracting an estimated 300,000 visitors annually, a fact that complicated the initial assessment by introducing the variable of numerous other people potentially being in the vicinity. The search involved officers from the RCMP, conservation officers, and search and rescue teams from both Alberta and British Columbia. These ground teams were supported by an extensive array of technological and specialized assets, including drones equipped with thermal imaging cameras, K9 units, and helicopters from a private company, which were deployed to provide an aerial perspective of the challenging terrain. From the outset, the weather was favorable, which provided a small measure of hope in the critical early hours of the operation. The search and rescue effort was characterized by its meticulous and expanding nature. Over the course of 11 days, the operation grew to involve more than 400 search and rescue volunteers from 50 different teams across Alberta, British Columbia, and Saskatchewan. These volunteers contributed a staggering 11,000 hours of search effort on the ground. They were joined by 60 members of the RCMP's Specialized Tactical Support Group, officers trained to search for even the smallest pieces of evidence in difficult environments. The search radius was eventually extended up to 12 kilometers from Darius's last known location, covering a total area of 22 square kilometers. The distance traveled by the ground search teams within this grid was recorded at more than 5,300 kilometers. The operation was a multi-agency endeavor that included not only ground personnel, but also boat-mounted sonar, swiftwater rescue teams, and underwater search teams to investigate the numerous rivers, creeks, and a large bog within the search area. Horses were also used to navigate parts of the rough terrain. Despite this massive and sustained effort, the outcome was consistently negative. No clothing, no footprints, and no personal items belonging to Darius were ever discovered. 2 separate volunteer teams of cadaver dogs were also brought in to search the area, and they too detected no trace of the missing boy. The lack of any physical evidence was a deeply perplexing aspect of the case for investigators. Typically, in searches for individuals lost in the wilderness, some sinner-dropped toy, a piece of clothing, a clear footprint is eventually found. The complete absence of such clues suggested several possibilities, none of which could be confirmed. Authorities maintained throughout the search that there was no evidence to indicate foul play, and no Amber Alert was issued because the criteria for abduction had not been met. Yet, the inability of the extensive search to locate any sign of Darius led to the difficult conclusion by officials that if he was still within the search area, he was likely no longer alive. On the 9th day of the search, the RCMP announced that the probability of his survival had dropped to less than 5%, a grim assessment based on factors such as the terrain, his age, his lack of preparedness for the elements, and the length of time he had been missing. Finally, on October 1st, after 11 days of intensive searching had yielded nothing, the official ground search was called off, and the area was reopened to the public, as the large-scale, coordinated search for Darius McDougall was formally suspended after 11 fruitless days. The focus of the effort shifted into a new, less visible phase, while the Royal Canadian Mounted Police transitioned the case to a missing persons investigation, maintaining that it would remain open and active. The family was left to navigate the profound uncertainty of their son's absence. In an effort to keep his memory in the public consciousness and to centralize the flow of information, friends and family members established a Facebook page titled "Bring Darius McDougall Home." This digital platform became the primary means through which the family communicated their experience and appealed for assistance. In their initial public post, they provided a detailed account of the circumstances leading up to the moment Darius vanished. They described their arrival at the campsite on Friday for a weekend intended to celebrate several family birthdays. an event that brought together an extended group of relatives. The statement reiterated the timeline of the final morning, explaining that as the adults were occupied with packing their vehicles for the journey home, the children, including Darius, his father's girlfriend's daughter Kaya, and a cousin, were playing on the small island directly adjacent to their camp. They emphasized that this area was just across the creek and remained within the sightline of the adults. The post articulated the now familiar sequence of events. The other children turned their backs for a brief moment, and when they looked again, Darius was gone. The family's public narrative was consistent and unwavering, yet it did little to quell a rising tide of public scrutiny and speculation that began to circulate on social media platforms. A significant portion of this online discourse centered on the family itself, with numerous individuals questioning the plausibility of the timeline and casting aspersions on the family's conduct. These attacks prompted legal and psychological experts commenting on the case to observe a common phenomenon in which the public seeks to assign blame in the face of a tragic and inexplicable event. The act of blaming, it was suggested, can create a psychological buffer for observers, allowing them to believe that such a tragedy could not befall them because they would have acted differently or more responsibly. This external judgment added another layer of distress for a family already contending with an unimaginable loss. The criticism became so intense that the family was compelled to disable the comment sections on their social media posts to shield themselves from the vitriol. Amidst this external pressure, the family continued to cooperate fully with law enforcement, and investigators, in turn, consistently stated that the parents were not considered suspects. The investigation also had to account for the specific vulnerabilities associated with Darius's autism. His aversion to loud noises and bright lights had been a factor in the official search, with teams attempting to use quieter methods and even playing his favorite song in the hope of drawing him out from a potential hiding place. This detail, shared by the family, underscored the unique challenges of the search and highlighted the specialized knowledge required to effectively look for a child with his specific needs. Experts on autism and child psychology noted that it is common for such children to be impulsive, easily distracted, and prone to wandering. Furthermore, when frightened, their instinct might be to hide and remain silent, making a conventional search based on calling out a name potentially ineffective. The family also addressed the 1-hour period between when they realized Darius was missing and when they placed the call to 911. They explained that their initial reaction was a frantic but hopeful search of the immediate area, driven by the belief that he could not have gone far and that they would find him quickly. This delay, while scrutinized by some online commentators, was viewed by many law enforcement and search and rescue experts as a very human and understandable response in a confusing and chaotic situation, particularly in a remote, outdoor setting where a child might be assumed to be hiding playfully or exploring nearby. While the family grappled with the ongoing mystery of Darius McDougall's disappearance and the difficult reality of a suspended official search, another tragedy unfolded that would add a further layer of complexity and sorrow to their situation. Several weeks after Darius was last seen, Kaya Warrior, the 6-year-old daughter of his father's girlfriend, Buffy, passed away. Kaya had been one of the last people to see Darius, as she was playing with him and another cousin on the small island across the creek at the moment he went missing. Her death occurred at a children's hospital following what was officially described as a medical emergency. The timing and the connection of this second event to the central figures in the disappearance of Darius immediately drew intense interest from both the public and investigators. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police promptly addressed the matter, issuing a statement to clarify that Kaya's death was determined to be the result of a pre-existing medical condition. Their investigation concluded that her passing was not criminal in nature and, crucially, was not related in any way to the disappearance of Darius McDougall. This official determination was unequivocal, intended to put an end to the inevitable speculation that would arise from such a statistically improbable confluence of tragic events affecting the same small group of people within a short span of time. Despite the clarity of the official statements, the news of Kaya's death fueled the very speculation that authorities had hoped to prevent. For a segment of the public already engaged in theorizing about the family's potential involvement in Darius's case, this second tragedy was interpreted not as a heartbreaking coincidence, but as a piece of a larger, unproven narrative. Legal analysts commenting on the case acknowledged the difficulty this development presented. They pointed to a long-standing axiom in criminal investigation, which holds that there are rarely true coincidences when two unusual and tragic events are so closely linked by the people involved. It is standard procedure for investigators to scrutinize the connection with extreme care. The RCMP confirmed that they had done so and had found no evidence to link the two incidents. For the family, and particularly for Darius's father, Dallas McDougall, and his girlfriend, Buffy, the loss of Kaya was a devastating blow, compounded by the continuing anguish over the search for Darius. Buffy had been an active participant in the search for Darius, and now she was mourning the loss of her own child. The family's public statements following Kaya's death were expressions of profound grief, and they requested privacy as they navigated this second, deeply personal tragedy. The official separation of the two cases did little to alter the complex emotional landscape of the investigation. While law enforcement proceeded with the two matters on separate and distinct tracks, one, an ongoing missing person case, the other, a closed, non-criminal death investigation, the public narrative inevitably intertwined them. The death of the only other child who was in Darius's immediate presence when he vanished meant that a potential witness, however young, was now gone. While it is uncertain what, if anything, a 6-year-old could have reliably communicated about the fleeting moments of his disappearance, her absence closed a door on any future possibility of gaining a clearer picture of that critical time frame from her perspective. The official conclusion remained that two separate, unrelated tragedies had befallen a single family, a devastating stroke of misfortune that, while statistically rare, was the only explanation supported by the available evidence. The official declaration that the death of Kaya Warrior was a separate and unrelated tragedy had the procedural effect of redirecting the focus of the ongoing investigation back to the primary and unresolved question of Darius McDougall's whereabouts. With the human elements of the case having led to a dead end, investigators and analysts were compelled to re-examine the physical environment in which the boy had vanished. The Krausnest Pass is not merely a backdrop to this event. It is an active participant, a vast and complex landscape, with its own history and characteristics that profoundly influenced both the disappearance and the subsequent search. The region is a significant mountain pass across the continental divide of the Canadian Rockies, situated on the border between the provinces of Alberta and British Columbia. For centuries, it has served as a critical transportation corridor, and its history is deeply intertwined with coal mining, which shaped the communities and the very terrain of the area. The landscape is a mosaic of steep mountains, dense coniferous forests dominated by lodgepole, pine and spruce, and a network of rivers and creeks that feed into the Old Man River Basin. The specific location of the family's campsite was within the Livingston Public Land Use Zone, an area designated for a mix of industrial and recreational activities, which means that while it offers a sense of wilderness, it is not an entirely untouched or isolated expanse. It is crisscrossed by old logging roads, industrial access routes, and recreational trails for hiking and all-terrain vehicles. This network of access points presents a complex variable in any search operation. It provides avenues for searchers to penetrate the wilderness, but it also offers potential entry and exit routes for any person who might have been in the area with unknown intentions. The terrain's challenges were noted from the very beginning of the search. The forest floor is often a thick tangle of dead fallen trees and branches that makes walking difficult and can easily conceal a small child. The ground is uneven, with sudden dips and inclines that are not always apparent on topographical maps. Furthermore, the region is home to a significant population of wildlife, including both black bears and grizzly bears, as well as cougars. The possibility of an animal encounter was a factor that search and rescue teams had to consider. Standard procedure in such cases involves looking for specific signs, such as drag marks, areas of disturbed ground, or the presence of animal tracks intermingled with human footprints. However, the comprehensive search of the 22 square kilometer area, which included expert trackers, found no evidence whatsoever to suggest that Darius had been the victim of a predator. The absence of any such signs, coupled with the fact that cadaver dogs did not register any alerts, made the animal attack theory highly improbable in the view of the experts involved. One of the most difficult features of the landscape mentioned by the search coordinators was the presence of a large bog. A bog is a type of wetland characterized by spongy, peat-accumulating ground and acidic water. From a search perspective, it is an exceptionally challenging environment. The soft, unstable ground can be treacherous to navigate, and the water can obscure anything that lies beneath its surface. The acidic nature of the water can also affect the decomposition process and the dissemination of scent, potentially complicating the work of cadaver dogs. The search of the bog was conducted multiple times using specialized teams, but like all other aspects of the physical search, it yielded no results. The bodies of water, including the creek that separated the campsite from the island where Darius was last seen, were also a primary focus. Swiftwater rescue teams and underwater search specialists, employing boat-mounted sonar, meticulously scanned these waterways. They were searching for any sign of the boy, operating under the tragic possibility that he might have fallen into the water and been carried downstream. The current in these mountain creeks can be deceptively strong, especially for a small child. Yet, once again, the exhaustive search of the aquatic environments produced no clothing, no belongings, and no sign of Darius himself. The sheer scale of the wilderness, even within the defined search area, was perhaps the most daunting challenge of all. Despite the deployment of more than 400 searchers, advanced technology, and thousands of hours of effort, the Crow's Nest Pass held onto its secret. The landscape, which had promised a weekend of family recreation, had instead become a silent, impenetrable repository of an unsolved mystery. Its vastness serving as a constant and humbling reminder of how completely a small child could be absorbed by the wild. With the exhaustive physical search of the Crow's Nest Pass area yielding no clues, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police's investigation into the disappearance of Darius McDougall formally transitioned from a search and rescue operation to a long-term missing persons case. This procedural shift altered the nature of the work involved, moving away from large-scale ground deployment and toward a more methodical, analytical approach focused on re-examining witness statements, exploring all theoretical possibilities, and keeping the case active in the event that new information might emerge. Central to this phase of the investigation was the information provided by those who were present at the campsite, particularly the other children who were with Darius in his final known moments. The primary witnesses were his 6-year-old playmate, Kaya Warrior, and an unnamed cousin. The process of interviewing child witnesses is a highly specialized field within criminal investigation, requiring the expertise of forensic interviewers trained to elicit information without leading the witness or contaminating their memory. For children of such a young age, their ability to recall and articulate a sequence of events can be limited, and their accounts can be susceptible to suggestion. Investigators would have conducted these interviews in a controlled, non-intrusive environment, using open-ended questions and other techniques designed to get the most accurate and untainted account possible. However, the content of these interviews was never made public, and with the subsequent death of Kaya Warrior, any opportunity for follow-up clarification from one of the two key child witnesses was permanently lost. The other significant human factor in the investigation was Darius's autism. This was not merely a personal detail, but a critical element that shaped both the search strategy and the analysis of his potential actions. Experts in search and rescue operations involving individuals with autism spectrum disorder emphasize that standard procedures must be adapted. For instance, the common behavior of elopement or wandering away from a safe environment is a significant risk. These children are often drawn to specific features in the landscape, such as water or interesting structures, and may not perceive the associated dangers. Furthermore, their sensory sensitivities mean that the noise and activity of a large search party could be overwhelming, causing them to hide more deeply rather than respond to calls for help. This is why the search team's efforts to use his favorite song was seen as a sound, informed strategy. The psychological profile of a child with autism also suggests that he might not have responded in a typical way if approached by a stranger. While there was no evidence to support an abduction theory, investigators had to consider it as a possibility, however remote. The fact that the area, while remote, is visited by hundreds of thousands of people annually meant that the family was not in complete isolation. An opportunistic predator could have been present, and a child who is nonverbal or does not react to social cues in a typical manner might be seen as a vulnerable target. Yet, this line of inquiry also failed to produce any leads. No other campers in the area reported seeing anything suspicious, and no vehicles were identified as being out of place. The statement by the RCMP that there was nothing to indicate foul play was a source of some confusion and debate among observers. From an official law enforcement perspective, such a statement typically means that there is a lack of positive evidence pointing to a criminal act. There was no ransom demand, no sign of a struggle at the scene, no credible witness to an abduction, and no confession. In the absence of such evidence, the default and most statistically probable explanation for a child going missing in a wilderness area is that the child simply became lost. The investigation and the search were therefore conducted primarily under that assumption. However, as the search failed to produce any sign of a lost child, the statement that there was no indication of foul play began to seem, to some, inconsistent with the complete lack of physical evidence. If he had become lost and succumbed to the elements, it was considered highly likely that some trace of him would have been found. The complete absence of evidence left a vacuum that was inevitably filled with speculation, much of which continued to be directed at the family on social media. Despite their full cooperation with the police and the lack of any evidence implicating them, the case file for Darius McDougal remains open. A collection of maps, search grids, interview transcripts, and procedural documents that, in their totality, describe an enormous effort that resulted in a complete absence of answers. Asterisk. The complete and categorical failure of the extensive 11D physical search to locate any trace of Darius McDougal necessitated a granular review of the methodologies and technologies that were deployed. The operation was not a haphazard effort. It was a systematic application of modern search and rescue doctrine, combining human resources with sophisticated equipment. The persistent lack of results in the face of such a comprehensive effort became, in itself, a significant and perplexing body of negative evidence. A critical component of the technological array was the use of aerial assets, specifically helicopters, and unmanned aerial vehicles, or drones, equipped with thermal imaging cameras. This technology operates by detecting infrared radiation, which is emitted by all objects as a function of their temperature. In a search and rescue context, the objective is to identify the heat signature of a human body against the cooler temperature of the surrounding environment. For this to be effective, a sufficient temperature differential must exist. The search for Darius took place in late September, a time when daytime temperatures in the Crowsnest Pass can be mild, but nighttime temperatures drop significantly, creating a more favorable condition for thermal detection. However, the effectiveness of thermal imaging is subject to numerous limitations. A dense forest canopy can obscure the view from above, preventing the sensors from detecting a heat source on the forest floor. The rugged, varied terrain, with its caves, overhangs, and deep crevices, also creates numerous pockets where a person could be concealed from aerial view. Furthermore, if a person were in water or a bog, their body temperature would quickly equalize with their surroundings, rendering them invisible to thermal sensors. While the aerial teams conducted numerous sorties over the search area at various times of day and night, their efforts did not yield any confirmed sightings or points of interest that led to a discovery on the ground. Equally important were the canine units, which represented a fusion of ancient tracking skills with modern training protocols. The search utilized distinct types of trained dogs, tracking or trailing dogs, and human remains detection dogs, also known as cadaver dogs. Tracking dogs are trained to follow a specific individual's scent, which is collected from an article of clothing or a personal item. These dogs could have potentially followed the path Darius took if he had wandered away from the island. However, no successful track was ever established, which could be due to a variety of factors, including the time lapse before their deployment, contamination of the scene by the initial family search, or the possibility that Darius did not leave a continuous scent trail on the ground, for instance, if he was carried or entered the water. The deployment of cadaver dogs addressed a different and more somber possibility. These animals are trained to detect the specific chemical compounds released during human decomposition. Their sense of smell is so acute that they can detect remains that are buried, submerged in water, or have been in a location for a very long time. They work by detecting a scent cone that rises from the source and is carried by the wind. Two separate, highly trained volunteer teams of cadaver dogs were brought to the Crowsnest Pass, and they methodically searched the entire designated area, paying special attention to the bog and the waterways. Their failure to register any alert or hit was one of the most significant findings of the entire operation. It strongly indicated that Darius had not perished within the 22 square kilometer search grid, even if he had been the victim of an animal attack. It is highly probable that some biological material would have remained, which the dogs would have detected. This lack of a cadaver dog alert substantially weakened the theories that he had become lost and succumbed to the elements, or that he had met with an accident within the search perimeter. The aquatic search component also involved advanced technology, most notably boat-mounted sonar. This system functions by emitting sound pulses into the water and measuring the echoes that return after striking an object. The data is then processed to create an image of the riverbed or lakebed, revealing any unusual objects or anomalies that could be a submerged person. The teams meticulously scanned the creeks and the bog, but the sonar imaging, like the thermal imaging from the air and the scent detection on the ground, revealed nothing of interest. The final layer of the search was the most fundamental: the human grid search. This method involves lines of searchers, often walking shoulder to shoulder, moving systematically through a predefined area to ensure that every square meter is visually inspected. Given the difficult terrain, this was an arduous and slow process. The more than 400 volunteers and 60 RCMP tactical support officers who participated in these grid searches were looking for anything out of place: a piece of fabric, a shoe, a fresh footprint, or any sign of the missing boy. The fact that more than 5,300 kilometers were collectively walked by these teams without a single piece of physical evidence being found is statistically extraordinary and stands as the most baffling aspect of the case. The cumulative failure of all these interlocking caesareal, canine, aquatic, and human did not simply result in a lack of answers. It actively reshaped the investigation by systematically ruling out the most common scenarios. The disappearance of Darius McDougall, when viewed in the broader context of missing persons cases in Canadian wilderness areas, occupies a rare and unsettling statistical category. Each year, search and rescue organizations across Canada respond to thousands of incidents involving individuals who become lost or injured in the backcountry. The vast majority of these cases, particularly those involving children, are resolved within the first 24 to 48 hours. A study of such incidents reveals predictable patterns. Lost children are typically found within a 1 to 2 kilometer radius of their point last seen, often having sought shelter or simply having become disoriented and stopped moving. In a smaller but still significant number of cases, the outcome is tragic, with the individual found deceased due to environmental exposure, a fall, or drowning. It is the third category, that of individuals who vanish without any physical trace whatsoever. That is the smallest and the most enigmatic. The McDougall case falls squarely into this last group, and its characteristics deviate sharply from the statistical norms. The response to Darius's disappearance was, by all professional accounts, a model of interagency, cooperation, and procedural correctness. Search and Rescue Alberta, the provincial coordinating body, along with the RCMP and numerous volunteer associations from neighboring provinces, executed a textbook response. A unified command structure was established. Search areas were methodically mapped and assigned based on probability models, and a massive amount of resources was deployed with remarkable speed. The failure of the search was not a result of procedural error, a lack of resources, or a delayed response. On the contrary, the proficiency of the response is precisely what makes the lack of results so profound. The operation effectively proved, with a high degree of certainty, where Darius was not. This process of elimination forces a re-evaluation of the initial working theories. The hypothesis that Darius simply wandered off and became lost, while the most common scenario for a missing child, is rendered almost untenable by the complete absence of evidence. It is exceptionally rare for a child to move through 13 square miles of rough terrain without leaving a single footprint, dislodging a stone, or snagging a piece of clothing on a branch. The theory of an accidental death, such as falling into a crevice or drowning in the creek, is similarly undermined by the failure of canine units, sonar, and underwater search teams to locate any remains. The possibility of a predatory animal attack, as previously discussed, was largely dismissed by experts on site due to the lack of any physical signs of a struggle or a kill site. Wild animals, particularly large predators like bears or cougars, are not tidy in their habits. An attack on a human would invariably leave behind significant and easily identifiable evidence, which specialized searchers are trained to find. The complete sterility of the scene in this regard was a powerful argument against this scenario. Consequently, by a process of logical deduction, the theory of abduction, or some other form of human intervention that resulted in the child being removed from the area, remains a significant possibility. This theory also lacks any direct, positive evidence. No witnesses reported seeing a suspicious person or vehicle. No ransom note was received. The family members present were extensively interviewed and were not considered suspects by the RCMP. An abduction from a relatively busy family campsite, with numerous adults and children present, would have been an act of extreme audacity and risk. It would have required an individual to approach the island, take the child, and retreat from the area, all within a very short time frame and without being observed. Despite these inherent difficulties, the abduction scenario provides a potential explanation for the most confounding element of the case: the total absence of physical clues. If Darius were removed from the location by a person, either on foot to a nearby vehicle or directly in a vehicle if one could get close enough, it would explain why the exhaustive search of the surrounding wilderness found nothing. He was not in the search area because he had been taken from it. This leaves the investigation in a state of profound ambiguity. It is a case defined not by the evidence it contains, but by the evidence it lacks. The official file remains open, a repository for a collection of facts that do not cohere into a conclusive narrative. It stands as a stark example of a rare phenomenon in which the established procedures and logical frameworks of investigation and search are applied to their fullest extent, only to be met with a silent and complete void. The logical progression of the investigation, having systematically eliminated the most probable scenarios of a child lost in the wilderness, inevitably left a vacuum of information that was quickly and thoroughly filled by public discourse. As the formal on-the-ground search operations wound down, a second, less structured investigation began in the digital sphere, a phenomenon that has become an integral and often challenging component of modern high-profile missing persons cases. This public inquiry was primarily centered around the Facebook page, Bring Darius McDougal Home, which the family and their supporters had established. Initially created as a tool to disseminate official information, share photographs of Darius, and coordinate volunteer efforts, the page rapidly evolved into a public square where grief, support, speculation, and accusation converged. The family's posts were carefully worded, conveying their profound distress, while also attempting to provide a clear, consistent narrative of the events of September 21st. They reiterated the timeline, described the setting, and made emotional appeals to anyone who might have been in the Crown's Pass area during that weekend to come forward with any information, no matter how insignificant it might have seemed. These communications were a direct reflection of a family thrust into an unimaginable circumstance, attempting to navigate a public role in the search for their child, while simultaneously processing a deep personal trauma. However, the nature of social media platforms meant that this controlled narrative was met with an uncontrolled and often volatile public reaction. A significant volume of the engagement was supportive, with thousands of individuals expressing sympathy, sharing the posts to amplify their reach, and offering prayers and encouragement. Yet, a substantial and vocal minority took a different approach, using the platform to dissect the family's statements, question their actions, and propose alternative theories about the boy's disappearance. This rise of the armchair detective is a well-documented aspect of contemporary true crime culture. For the Darius McDougal case, the primary focus of this unofficial scrutiny was the timeline, the statement that Darius vanished in the brief moment that the other children turned their backs was subjected to intense analysis. Commenters questioned the physical possibility of a 6-year-old disappearing so completely in a matter of seconds from an open area visible to adults. This led to a proliferation of theories, many of which posited some form of negligence or direct involvement on the part of the family members present. The 1-hour delay between the family's realization that Darius was missing and their call to emergency services also became a significant point of contention for this online audience. Despite official explanations that such a delay is common and understandable in wilderness settings, the public attacks became so severe and distressing for the family that they were eventually forced to disable the comment function on their posts, a defensive measure that insulated them from the direct hostility but did not stop the speculative conversations from migrating to other forums and true crime groups. This digital activity ran on a parallel track to the official RCMP investigation, operating under a completely different set of rules. While the police were constrained by the principles of evidence and due process, the public was free to speculate without any such limitations. This created a dual reality for the case: the official version, which was defined by a lack of evidence and the careful, methodical work of investigators, and the public version, which was a dynamic and often chaotic ecosystem of theories, rumors, and accusations. This public scrutiny also extended to the tragic death of Kaya Warrior. Despite the RCMP's definitive statement that her death was non-criminal, from a pre-existing medical condition, and entirely unrelated to the disappearance of Darius, many online commentators refused to accept this conclusion. They viewed the official explanation as a cover-up, weaving her death into elaborate conspiracy theories that implicated the adults who were on the camping trip. This insistence on finding a narrative, even in the absence of supporting facts, highlights a fundamental human response to unexplained tragedy: the desire to impose order and meaning on random, chaotic events. For law enforcement, this digital noise presents a significant challenge. While they monitor social media for any credible leads, they must also expend resources to filter out the vast majority of baseless speculation and to manage the public perception of an investigation that is often, by necessity, conducted out of the public eye. The family, in the meantime, was left in the unenviable position of having to defend themselves against public suspicion, while simultaneously enduring the unceasing pain of not knowing what happened to their son. As months turned into years, the case of Darius McDougal settled into the quiet, persistent state of an unsolved mystery, its file remaining open within the Royal Canadian Mounted Police's Historical Case Unit. The absence of a body, a confession, or any definitive physical evidence meant that the investigation could not be formally closed. Yet without new information, there were no active avenues to pursue. The case exists now primarily as a collection of records: the initial incident reports, the meticulously detailed logs of the 11-day search, the transcripts of interviews with family members and other potential witnesses, and the analytical reports on the fruitless deployment of technology. It is a comprehensive archive of a massive but ultimately failed effort, a testament to the limits of human endeavor when confronted by a complete informational void. For the McDougal family and their community, the lack of resolution creates a unique and enduring form of grief, often referred to as ambiguous loss. This psychological state, characterized by the absence of certainty, prevents the normal process of mourning from proceeding. Every possibility, from the hope that Darius is somehow still alive to the fear of his certain death, remains in play. The family has continued to maintain their Bring Darius McDougal Home Facebook page, periodically posting on anniversaries of his disappearance or on his birthday, keeping his image in the public consciousness and holding on to the slim hope that someone, somewhere, holds a piece of information that could provide an answer. These posts are marked by a tone of sorrowful endurance, a reflection of a life lived alongside a perpetual question mark. From a legal and procedural standpoint, the case illustrates the inherent challenges of investigating a disappearance in a vast wilderness area, particularly when the initial moments of the event are unwitnessed. The point last seen is a precise location, but the possibilities radiating from that point are nearly infinite. The search operation, despite its scale, could only cover a finite area, while it was concluded with a high degree of confidence that Darius was not within the 22 square kilometer grid. The question of how he might have been removed from that area, whether by human hand or some other improbable means, remains entirely in the realm of speculation. The case also serves as a stark illustration of the friction between official investigation and public opinion in the digital age. The RCMP conducted their work by the book, adhering to evidence and protocol, and their conclusion was that there was no basis to name any suspects or to officially categorize the disappearance as an abduction. The court of public opinion, however, felt no such constraints and continued to host a wide range of theories, many of which assigned blame to the very family that was living through the tragedy. This divergence highlights a difficult reality. For those involved in such cases, they must not only navigate their personal grief and the complexities of the legal system, but also the unpredictable and often cruel judgment of a global audience. The legacy of the Darius McDougal case is one of profound and unsettling questions. It is a story that defies easy categorization, fitting neither the typical narrative of a child lost to the elements, nor the clear-cut profile of a criminal abduction. It is defined by its absences: the absence of clues, the absence of witnesses, the absence of a body, and ultimately, the absence of an answer. The Crow's Nest Pass, a place of immense natural beauty, now holds this dark, silent mystery within its rugged landscape. Human nature always searches for answers. We try to illuminate every clue, every whisper, every dark corner. However, for some questions, remaining unanswered is, in fact, the most accurate answer. See you in the next Unsolved File, *.